The soil of Kentucky was cracked like my hands, split from years of toil, darkened by sweat and blood that never seemed to wash away. I was born into those cracks, into chains, into a world where the whip sang louder than the mockingbird. Folks talk of Kentucky's rolling hills and bluegrass fields, but to me, it was nothing more than an endless prison yard, fenced not with walls but with fear. Day after day, the sun rose like a master itself, cruel and burning. By dawn, I was in the fields, bent low, the iron of shackles gnawing my ankles when I moved too slow. The stalks cut my skin, the dirt baked my feet, and my belly hollered for food that never came. My name was Jacob, though even that was a kindness rarely given. To them, I was boy, hands, or worse, words spat like tobacco juice. The master's porch was my stage of humiliation. Every evening he sat there with his glass of whiskey, rocking slow, his boots stretched out while we bent our backs to his wealth. That porch beam stretched high and proud above him, a shadow falling across the yard. I can still see him, his lips wet with liquor, his eyes cold as nails, as he ordered one of us to be whipped for nothing more than slowing in the heat. I remember one evening clearer than all others. My cousin Elias was caught glancing toward the tree line. Just a glance, no more than a breath of longing for freedom. That was all it took. The overseer dragged him forward, rope around his wrists, and laid him down in the dirt like an animal. The master leaned back in his chair, sipping slow, and gave the nod. The whip cracked, splitting the night open. I'd heard it 1,000 times before, but that evening it tore straight through me. Each lash landed on Elias's back until flesh turned red and wet. He cried out once, then went silent, his body jerking under the blows. The master smirked as if it were music played for his amusement. I wanted to look away, but my eyes stayed fixed. My hands shook at my sides. Something inside me snapped like a rope pulled too tight. I'd endured many beatings of my own, stripes across my back, knees driven into the dirt, hunger gnawing me hollow. But watching Elias's blood seep into the soil did something different. It was as if the land itself was groaning, tired of drinking the blood of men who only wanted to breathe free. I heard my mother's words in my memory. A man can bow only so long before the bow breaks. That night, I knew I was breaking. I did not speak it then, not aloud. My tongue had learned silence, my lips had learned to swallow rage. But deep in my chest, I swore a vow. The porch where he drank, where he laughed as our bodies were ruined, would not stand as his throne forever. It would be his gallows. That beam that cast a shadow across us would one day bear his weight. I was no fool. I knew revolt meant death, chains tighter than before, or a tree's noose tightening around my own neck. But death already slept in our cabins, in the hollow bellies of children, in the scars on our backs. Death was no stranger. If I was to meet him, I wanted it to be on my feet, not bent in the fields. That night, as Elias lay groaning in the dirt, I knelt beside him and pressed my hand to his trembling shoulder. He looked at me, eyes dull with pain, and I whispered so only he could hear, "It won't always be this way." My voice shook, but the words felt heavier than iron, heavier than chains. I rose to my feet, blood pounding in my ears. The master laughed, tossing his glass aside, whiskey soaking the wood of that porch. He thought he had won again, that silence would reign and the lash would keep us docile. But in that laugh, I heard his doom. He didn't know it yet, but I had already chosen the rope for him. The soil of Kentucky still cracked beneath my feet. The whip still sang. But I had begun to sing back, though the song was only inside me then. A song of fire, of vengeance, of a porch turned from throne to gallows. My silence had ended. And soon, my master would learn what it meant to swing where he once sat proud. The nights on the plantation had always been thick with silence, so still you could hear the sweat drip from your brow onto the cabin floor. But after Elias's beating, that silence grew heavy, dangerous. It wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. I started whispering under my breath while I worked, praying but not to the white man's God. I spoke to my ancestors, the ones who had not been chained, the ones who had walked free in Africa and fought for what was theirs. I asked them to steady my hand to open my eyes. And soon, I saw who else had fire behind theirs. It began in the prayer circle. That was the only time they let us gather without a whip at our backs. We would sing low, call out to the Lord, or at least make them think we were. But beneath the hymns, we passed looks, glances, nods. We carved meaning into silence. That's where I found Jonah. Broad as a mule and twice as stubborn, he had arms that could swing an axe like it weighed nothing. He used to be a free blacksmith in Virginia before they snatched him off the road one night and sold him down here. His voice was quiet, but when I told him what I was planning, he didn't blink. "If I'm gonna die anyway," he said, "I'd rather do it with my hands round that devil's throat." Then there was Ruth. She worked in the big house, quick-witted and quiet, with eyes that missed nothing. She knew where the keys were kept when the guards changed, which doors creaked, and which ones didn't. She carried scraps of food to the cabins, but what she really delivered were messages, maps drawn in ash and spit on old rags. "I've seen too much," she told me one night, her voice barely louder than breath. "If you mean to finish it, I'll help light the fire." And there was Micah, barely 12, with scars on his wrists and a memory sharper than any blade. He'd been born into this place, never seen the world beyond the cotton rows, but his heart beat like a drum in rebellion. He brought us nails, broken tools, bits of rope. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with conviction. "I ain't got nothin' to lose," he told me once. "But I want to live long enough to see that porch beam hangin' a white man for once." Each night, we met in secret. The cabins were watched during the day, but darkness was our friend. We'd gather under the guise of prayer, some kneeling, some swaying, some clutching Bibles with pages long torn, but our real gospel was passed in pieces. A whisper here, a nod there. No paper, no plans drawn, just memory and trust. The weight of it pressed on me. Any wrong move could kill us all. One word from a traitor, one misstep, and they'd hang us from trees before the rooster crowed. Some nights I sat outside, staring at the moon, wondering if I was leading good people to slaughter. But every time I faltered, I saw Elias's blood in the dirt. I saw the master's boots on the porch railing. I heard that laugh, that dry, cracking laugh, and I remembered. We didn't just want escape. We wanted justice. And justice meant that the very place where he sat and ruled would become the place where he fell. That porch beam, once the shadow of our torment, would hold his neck like it held our fear. Jonah practiced knots on leftover rope. Ruth watched the master's habits and mapped every step. Micah gathered iron scraps we could shape into crude weapons. I listened. I prayed. I waited for the wind to shift. One night, just before dawn, I stood outside the cabin, heart racing like a drum. The others were sleeping or pretending to. The world was quiet, but I felt the air humming. The trees stood still, but I swore I heard them whisper. I clenched my fists and looked toward the big house, the silhouette of that porch rising like a gallows already built. I thought about turning back. I thought about surviving in silence. But then I heard my own voice echo inside me, louder than any fear. "Better to die on my feet than live forever on my knees." The words didn't come from my mouth. They came from my bones, from my blood, from every ancestor who had been stolen and silenced. I knew then I wasn't alone. I never had been. The fire had started. Quiet, yes, but fire doesn't need to shout. It only needs to spread. And we were ready to burn the memory of that man into the wood that once watched us suffer. The sky that night held no moon, just a thick darkness that poured down over the fields like ink, heavy and hot. Even the crickets seemed to know what was coming. They held their breath with us. The air crackled with a storm that hadn't yet broken, the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl and your bones hum like lightning. I stood near the edge of the slave quarters, the big house looming in the distance like a sleeping giant. That porch beam, our gallows in waiting, was silhouetted against the sky. I remember thinking it looked smaller than usual. Maybe it was because, for once, it didn't scare me. Beside me, Jonah held a hoe sharpened down to a blade. Ruth clutched a kitchen knife wrapped in cloth. Micah had a hammer, barely bigger than his hand, but he held it like a sword. No one spoke, not a single word. Our plan didn't need words anymore. It had lived too long in our bones. We moved like shadows, bare feet silent in the dirt. The dogs were silent too. Ruth had fed them meat laced with sleeping powder from Miss Clara's medicine cabinet. The overseers, Jonah took care of them before the moon rose. I didn't ask how. I just saw their rifles tossed in the weeds and knew they wouldn't trouble us. The big house creaked under the pressure of the wind. The sky rumbled as we stepped onto the wraparound porch. The wood moaned beneath our feet, as if it knew what we were about to do. That's when the door swung open. He stepped out, still tying the belt of his night robe, hair tousled from sleep, whiskey glass still in hand like a man who'd never known fear. "What in hell's?" He didn't finish. His eyes swept across us. He counted bodies. He saw blades. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure. That was the moment I tasted something sweeter than any fruit on this earth, his fear. "Drop them tools," he barked, trying to summon the old voice, the master's voice, but it cracked. He took a step back. No one moved, not a soul. He looked straight at me. "Jacob, boy, what do you think you're doing?" I stepped forward. The others opened a path without a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Collecting a debt," I said, his face twisted. Anger, confusion, fear, then a grin. "You think this changes anything? You think killing me will make you free?" "No," I said, my hand tightening on the rope Ruth had coiled around her waist. "But it'll make me whole." He tried to run, of course he did, but Jonah caught him by the collar and slammed him to the ground like a bag of flour. He kicked and cursed and screamed for help. But the house was silent. There was no one left to hear him. I climbed the steps to that porch, slowly, like a man approaching his own past. That was the same beam I'd been tied to as a boy, the same spot Elias had bled beside, the same place the whip had kissed my back while the master laughed and sipped his drink. Now he was the one on his knees. I threw the rope over the beam. It landed with a thunk, clean and final, like it had been waiting for this moment all its life. The master looked up at it, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not hatred, not cruelty, panic. "I fed you," he said, crawling backward like a dog. "I gave you a place. I cut him off. You gave me chains." He screamed as Jonah hauled him to his feet and held him firm. Ruth handed me the rope's loop. My fingers shook as I slipped it over his neck. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I doubted what we were doing. Not because I feared punishment, but because I wanted to remember this moment with clarity for every ancestor who never got to see it, for my mother who died whispering freedom into my ear, for Elias who still bore scars that the earth would never forget. The storm broke then. Rain hit the porch hard and sudden. Thunder roared like applause. I stepped back. I gave the signal. Jonah pulled. The beam groaned as the rope stretched. And the master, my master no more, rose into the air like a rotten fruit plucked by the hand of justice itself. His legs kicked, then stilled. We stood in silence, watching, not cheering, not crying, just standing, and for the first time in our lives we stood taller than him, taller than fear, taller than the porch that had witnessed our suffering. Micah whispered, "It's done." But I knew it wasn't. Not yet. I walked up to the rocking chair where he used to sit, laid my hand on it. It was warm from the storm, but empty. Then I looked up at the rope and said, loud enough for every spirit in the trees to hear, "This beam don't belong to him no more." The rope was still swinging when the storm finally reached its full howl. Thunder cracked above us like the voice of God himself had taken notice. Rain pounded the roof of the big house, washing the blood from the porch boards into the dirt where it had come from. But nothing could wash away what had just happened. Nothing ever would. The silence didn't last. Once the master fell, the fire we'd been holding in our chests erupted across the plantation like lightning striking dry brush. There was no order now, no overseers calling names, no whip cracking down on our necks. Chaos roared louder than the storm. We burst through the doors of the big house, weapons gripped in trembling hands, not for greed, not to steal what we'd been denied, but because it was ours now, and we needed to see it, to walk those halls we'd only ever cleaned on our knees. One of the overseers tried to make a run for it out the back door. Ruth caught him first. Her blade flashed once in the dark, and then he was on his knees, begging. She didn't kill him. She just took the keys from his belt and told him to crawl, like he'd made her do for years. Another guard fired a shot into the night. The sound tore through us. Micah ducked, Jonah charged, and I heard the thud of fists and the shatter of teeth on brick. We lost 2 of our own in that skirmish. One caught a bullet in the shoulder and bled out before sunrise. Another was stabbed by a frightened house slave who didn't understand what was happening. Freedom don't come without cost. I learned that with every scream, with every drop of blood that hit the floor, white or black. By dawn, the fire had settled into embers. The storm moved on. The sky turned soft and orange behind the trees, and the world looked different. Not free, not yet, but different. The master's body still hung from the porch beam. We left it there, not out of cruelty, but truth. A symbol. A warning. A grave marker carved in air. The same beam that had loomed over our punishment now bore the weight of justice. And justice, for once, had a face that looked like ours. The other plantations would find out soon enough. A rider would carry word. A trader would see the body swinging in the rain. They'd send men, guns, hounds, fire. We knew that. But for that one morning, there was quiet. Not peace, not safety, but dignity. I walked through the yard barefoot, mud caked on my feet, hair soaked, shirt torn. But I'd never felt more human. My back still bore scars from the whip. My wrists still had calluses from the chains, but my spirit, my soul, stood upright. I stopped beneath that porch and looked up at the man who had once owned my breath, my blood, my bones. He looked small now, not because death had shrunk him, but because truth had. He wasn't a god, wasn't a king, just a man who'd spent his life convincing himself he was better because he was born lighter. And now, in death, he swung no higher than any of us could reach. Jonah stood beside me, arms crossed, quiet as the morning. Ruth lit a lantern and held it high, casting shadows across the porch. Micah sat in the grass, staring, not afraid, not happy, just changed. "We should cut him down," Ruth said softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let the world see. Let every master feel the tremble when they sip their morning coffee and hear what happened on this land. Let them remember that the porch beam don't care what color a man is when the noose comes calling. This wasn't revenge, not really. Revenge is petty. Revenge burns fast and leaves ash. This was something deeper, older. This was a reclaiming of our story, of our worth. Of our names whispered in the night, our songs sung in chains, our children born into shackles with eyes too bright for slavery. That morning, I closed my eyes and imagined my mother's face. She died when I was young, sick from the cold, overworked, underfed. But she'd always whispered, "You ain't no beast, Jacob, you come from kings." I believed her, and now I had acted like it. They came at dawn on the 3rd day. I heard the dogs first, far off but gaining. Hooves kicked up dust like thunder across the hills. White men in blue coats, rifles strapped to their backs and vengeance in their eyes. We'd already sent the children into the woods. The elders, too. I told Ruth to vanish like smoke. Told Jonah to run if the wind shifted. Micah begged to stay. Said he'd fight with me, but I placed my hand on his chest and said, "You're the story now." He cried. I didn't. I was done crying. I don't know what happened after I slipped into the cane fields. Maybe they caught Jonah. Maybe Ruth made it north. Maybe they torched the cabins to ash, hanged 3 for everyone we lost. That's the way it always went. And maybe they caught me. Maybe my body swung next to the master's and the porch beam bore two ghosts instead of one. Or maybe I kept running. Maybe I vanished into the swamps, bones slick with mud, breath shallow beneath the cattails. Maybe I crossed into Tennessee with Ruth beside me, or boarded a freedom boat at night, pretending to be dead until the river carried me into a world where chains didn't fit. Truth is, it don't matter what became of me. What matters is this: they still whisper my name. Across Kentucky and further still, wherever the wind carries the scent of fire and the memory of blood. In fields where the cane still cuts and the overseer still walks, men and women bend low and murmur, "Jacob of Kentucky hanged his master on the porch." They say it in code, in prayer, in lullabies to children born into stolen breath. Sometimes they say I flew away like smoke. Other times they say I walk still, barefoot and free, preaching justice in the trees. That's how legends live. They don't ask for permission, they just become. I was never trying to become a ghost or a tale told by candlelight. I was just a man, a tired man, a man with rope in his hand and fury in his chest. I had nothing to give this world but the truth of what they did to us. And the truth of what we could do back. If they killed me, they buried a seed. If I escaped, I watered that seed. But either way, it grew. See, the porch ain't just wood. It ain't just nails and stain and southern comfort. It's a symbol. It's the place they watched us break, laughed while we bled, called us boy while sipping the blood-warm taste of power. And I turned it into a gallows. That ain't madness. That's balance. So let them write their history books and scrub their names clean. Let them build monuments to men who built nothing but suffering. I don't need my name carved in stone. I don't need a grave. I got something better. I got the wind that carries my story. The fire that burns in the eyes of boys like Micah. The rope that once swung over me, now swinging for me. They tried to silence me, same as they did the rest, with hunger, with fear, with beatings and chains, but I broke the silence. I turned it into thunder. And even if my bones rot deep in some forgotten ditch, my voice rides every shout that dares to rise. Every whip deflected, every chain broken, every porch that trembles when a master steps out to find no one afraid. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not beg for understanding. All I ask is that when they speak of me, they tell it true, that Jacob of Kentucky stood tall one night, that he took the rope meant for him and made it sing justice. They will not remember me as a slave. They will remember me as the man who turned the master's porch into his gallows. What part of Jacob's story struck you the hardest? Was it the swing of the rope, or the silence that followed? If this story moved you, if you believe the voices of the forgotten deserve to be heard, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, and share this story so Jacob's name is never erased. Comment below, what would freedom have meant to you if you were born in Jacob's chains?